A Plague Tale Requiem is one of my favorite games of this year, without a doubt. Narratively, graphically, it hits all of the right markers, and I think they did a tremendous job following up 2019's A Plague Tale Innocence. Now, even though I love this game a lot, and I think there's a lot to praise, there are some issues and there are some things that I think could be improved upon in the next game, which they sort of hint at possibly happening at the end of the game with a sort of cliffhanger, but also not really. We'll get to it. But either way, whatever game Asobo Studio makes next, I think they could learn from some of the missteps they took in this game, some of the things that they played a little safe, and I want to discuss all of those in this video. Now, earlier this week, I released a review where I broke down the game sort of in broad strokes without getting into super spoilerific territory. If you want to hear my thoughts without spoilers, go check that video out. I'll have it linked in the description box below the like button. But if you're going to stick it out in this video, I assume that you are okay with having a ton of stuff spoiled, because I'm going to be showing clips from all throughout the game. I'm going to be talking about multiple plot points that are certainly spoilerific. So just understand that this is sort of your piss or get off the pot moment. Like, I'm gonna spoil it, be warned. But with that, we're gonna get into it. I just really quickly want to say I don't have a sponsor for this video. I don't have anything like that. All I ask is that if you really enjoy this content, you hit the like button, you subscribe, and if you want to hang out with me live when we play games like this, when we're just talking about gaming news, whatever, come over to the Luke Stevens Live YouTube channel. I'll have it linked below as well in my link tree. It's a YouTube channel. All we do is post like stream highlights. We stream on that channel. It's a great time. We have thousands of people that come out to all of those streams regularly, and I would love for you to be one of them. And plus, when we do certain videos, you could even end up in one of them when we show chat or take comments, or sometimes they even make videos based off of the comments we get in chat. So who knows, you might even be able to kickstart a YouTube career if you get featured in one of those. I mean, probably not, but still, like, it could be cool. I would just like for you to be able to hang out and to be able to chat with you. So come over, say hi. I would love to see you. But with that, let's just get right into it. Now, the first thing I want to say is that A Plague Tale Requiem really feels like A Plague Tale Innocence 1.5. In many ways, they played this pretty safe, and they didn't do a lot that's totally different from the original. It's probably the main thing that a lot of reviewers pointed to as a problem with A Plague Tale Requiem, simply that they didn't take enough risks and do enough differently for it to feel like a markedly different game in terms of structure and content. But I actually don't find this to be a major issue, especially considering the fact that this game is coming only 3 years after the previous title, and it was primarily developed in the middle of COVID. We're currently in an age when every game on the planet is being delayed into years 4, 5, 6, 7 even. So to get a game within 3 years that's also really, really well done, extremely well polished as well, and that manages its scope relatively well, I think it's not actually that big of a problem. Certainly we could say, well, we wish that they would have added more like combat stuff, maybe an improved melee combat system so that you could actually go in and sort of physically fight your way through certain levels. And I would agree that stuff would have been awesome. But I'm sure once COVID hit, they needed to reevaluate what they were able to do, and they pulled all of that back and just focused on sort of doing what they did in A Plague Tale Innocence, but on a much bigger scale. And in that pursuit, they succeeded. You know, it's one of the things we've been talking about on this channel a fair amount, and that is to not judge a game based on what we want it to be, but rather evaluate it based on what it is trying to be and what the developers wanted it to be. For example, like I think it's unfair of me to judge Fallout 4 as, say, a super intense narrative RPG, and to say the game sucks because the story barely has any branching choices. And this is something I used to say, which is why I bring it up as an example, because I was committing sort of a fallacy at the time, a category fallacy, where I'm trying to judge something based on something it's not. It just doesn't make sense. And with A Plague Tale Requiem, it's another case where we have to evaluate it as it is, not as we wished it would be, if that makes sense. Because pretty clearly this game wasn't trying to go crazy, add tons of new gameplay systems. It wasn't trying to do all of that simply because they didn't think they could manage that, while also going bigger in scale with big set pieces and the other things that they do really well in this game, and also while getting it out within a reasonable amount of time. So I just want to acknowledge up front in this video that I understand the frustration that people have, that this game feels like sort of just a huge, massive DLC for the first game because the gameplay doesn't change up that much. I understand that frustration, but the game can still be tremendous while playing it safe in the gameplay department. And honestly, considering the fact that the original game is only 8 hours long or so, give or take an hour, I think it's really just not that big of a deal. You know, it's not like the Assassin's Creed titles of late where you have a 60, 70, 80-hour campaign, and then a year and a half later, we have another game with another 80-hour campaign that's basically got the same combat involved, just copy and paste it all throughout the map. We're not dealing with anything like that. I think it very reasonable to say that you could play A Plague Tale Innocence and just blast all the way through Requiem in one weekend and just have a great time while doing it, and I don't think you would be that fatigued by the end of it. And perhaps the last thing I'll say is that I think that the easiest thing to compare this game to, and I mentioned this in the review, is probably Uncharted 2. It's an improvement on the original based in scale, budget, and sort of scope, instead of mechanically improved compared to like Assassin's Creed 2 over Assassin's Creed 1. With Assassin's Creed 2, they took all of the gameplay systems and ideas they had with that original game, turned the knobs up to 11, added a bunch of new knobs, and then it ended up being great because it was so different, but it was clearly inspired by the original, but it was like a totally different gameplay experience. Whereas Uncharted 2 uses a lot of the same mechanisms, combat systems, everything that Uncharted 1 used, but they just changed the scope, went bigger, went badder, made it more cinematic, more serious, more gritty, and they changed everything. And as a result, Uncharted 2 is considered one of the best Uncharted games, if not the best, even though it's not, in terms of gameplay, massively improved over the original. And again, if you want to hear my extended thoughts on the Uncharted series, earlier this year, I did an 8-hour critique breaking down all of those games. So if you want to hear those critiques all in one fell swoop, I have that linked again in the description box below the like button. And if you want to listen to these critiques on the go, I also have them listed on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even SoundCloud, where you can download the MP3 directly if you want to listen to it that way. It's just my way of saying thank you. Like, if you're willing to listen to it on the go for it. I don't make any money from those platforms. So if you like it, I guess just like rate it, I guess is what I'm supposed to ask you to do. But if you want to listen to these videos on the go, that's a great option. But let's get specific. What does this game do well and badly in terms of gameplay? And what does the gameplay even look like? Well, most of the combat is tied up in Amicia, the main character's sling. Whether it's a stealth sequence or a melee combat sequence where you're just rushing through waves of enemies, you're probably going to be using the sling primarily. There are a couple of other ways that you can take out enemies, such as with oil pots and fire effects, or with a knife that you can pick up and use to sort of quickly stab somebody, but the knife is used in the process, so you can't do that with everybody. There's some other options, but 99% of the time, it's going to be the sling. It controls pretty much identically to the original game, with you having to use left trigger to basically scope up and focus on a target. You want to time your release of the rock right as the box closes in completely, so that you have the most accurate shot available. This really comes down to muscle memory. You're going to get the hang of it pretty quickly. I still had the muscle memory from the original game of hold it down, it's like 3/4 of a second, and then you hit right trigger and the rock goes flying and is perfectly accurate. It's pretty generous, and it's not particularly difficult. And with our sling, we can also affix to the rocks that we sling different alchemical effects that we craft using items we gather in the environments. These have a bunch of different things that they are capable of doing, some which were of course available in the original game, such as the fire effect, which allows you to ignite things that are flammable, or for example, the extinguish ability that allows you to basically snuff out a flame, which is really helpful if like a guard is walking along carrying a torch and is surrounded by rats. You just extinguish the torch, he gets eaten up and is dead, easy peasy. And then they also have oil, which of course allows you to throw down a bunch of oil, which you can then later ignite, or if you throw the oil near a fire or open flame, it will immediately ignite. This is useful for fighting big brutes of enemies or clearing large swaths of rats all at the same time. And of course the attraction ability, which basically allows you to craft an alchemical compound that you can throw, and then rats are attracted to it, running over to it, clearing out spaces in the process. You can also use this in later levels where it's just all shadow and dark, and you can throw this to attract more rats into a particular section of the map, which then makes them more concentrated there, and after they're done with that thing that they're attracted to, they disperse evenly, and they might be able to explore other areas that the rats weren't originally in, finding new guards to clear out, etc. It's much less useful than you might think, and they only use it a few times, at least in terms of what's mandated in the storyline puzzles, so it's not super well utilized. It's used like a couple of times, but it's still a nice ability to have. Later in the game, you also get access to a crossbow that you can use. This thing is very, very sketchy. Basically, you only have the ability to carry 1 or 2 bolts. You can upgrade it later with different crafting materials that you get, so you can start carrying more than 1 bolt at a time to like 2 and 3 bolts. It's relatively useful, and it usually kills guards, even plated and armored ones, in a single shot, which is great, though I will say often it feels pretty overpowered. There's a couple of sequences at the very end of the game, such as this one where Arno and the Count are fighting, and you're just told to hold off waves of enemies as they come at you. And you can tell the developers were like, I feel like it's probably not super fair because Amicia is just flinging rocks at all these big brutes. So they start sprinkling like these crossbow bolts all over the map and arena. So you just run around, find the bolts, load it up, shoot somebody, run around, grab the bolt, shoot the guy, run around, grab the bolt, shoot the guy. Oh no, no more bolts. Oil, fire, run around. Ooh, more bolts have spawned. And you just do that for like 5 minutes. It's a little underwhelming, and I think it just proves the point that the crossbow is a little OP. As for how you make something like this feel really good or work well, I think it just comes down to requiring more skill to do it. It uses the same basic aiming mechanic as the sling, so you just hold down left trigger, the square closes in, and then you're locked in, and you will have a perfectly aimed shot every single time. I think instead, requiring the player to have a little bit more finesse with this would be a good addition. Maybe not an auto lock on, maybe that's available in the accessibility menu or something, but just require the player to do a little more work with this, because right now it just feels like an insta-kill whenever you want to use it, and that's just, it's not super fun. But this is all mostly relegated to when enemies are aware of you, they're coming at you, and you want to take them out quickly. What does the game prioritize though? Well, without a doubt, it's stealth. And it makes sense narratively. Amicia is a fairly young female. She's small in stature, and usually she's carrying her 5-year-old brother along with her, or another child. And so it makes sense that she wouldn't want to get in there guns ablazing going crazy. You know, it checks out narratively. I will say though, there are multiple times where Amicia sort of loses it and tries to be that like crazy Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn and Forbidden West type character who's just getting in there and like, hold on, hold my beer, I gotta go fight some guys. And she marches off and tries to shoot everybody and throw rocks at everybody's heads. Doesn't usually end well narratively, and it's sort of a recurring theme that Amicia is not a one-person army and has to be smart about this and not put people's lives in danger or at risk unnecessarily. And I appreciated that, because it seems like nowadays in video game narratives, especially with female characters, unfortunately, it seems like the writers are terrified of allowing a character to be intelligent and like not rush into situations unnecessarily or riskily. It's one of the reasons I think the writing in The Last of Us Part 2 is really well done, because every time Ellie tries to go in and do something irresponsible like that, she gets punished for it physically, emotionally. Her friends die, everything happens as a result of that. So it makes sense, because if she does that, she gets punished for it. But with something like Horizon Zero Dawn, it seems like Aloy is just invincible, and whatever she wants to do, however objectively stupid it is, she just gets away with it, and then everybody's fine. And the one time like a friend of hers dies, she's just like, oh, that sucks. Anyway, let's keep going, and doesn't talk about it for the rest of the story. So I really appreciate that with Amicia, they're at least coming out and giving her some vulnerability and then some weaknesses, and then also coming out and just being like, hey, yeah, no, she's not perfect. She's not G.I. Jane. She might slap, but not that hard. Jesus, was that too on the nose? I'm going to keep going. And they just allow her to be a human being. It's nice. I can't believe I have to say that I wish more characters were human in their design, but you know what? This is where we are now. But with regards to the stealth, it's relatively well done. I will insist, I don't think the AI is particularly intelligent, even though a couple of times I thought that they were doing things that perhaps were smart, and then I realized I think I was just reading into their movements a little too much. It's pretty much the same as the original game. They have a vision cone, and if you walk in front of it, they'll see you. If you make a lot of noise, they'll detect that. But for the most part, these guys are pretty stupid. And they also very rarely even come to a light jog to chase after you. So even if you are spotted, you can usually sprint around the corner, hide in some tall grass, and you'll lose them pretty quickly. Without a doubt, I think this is one of the frustrating limitations of doing such a quick turnaround on this game. They didn't have enough time to really develop and crank up the AI, and it's unfortunate because I think that was one of the big weaknesses in the original game, and if they could take that up a notch for whatever their next game is, it will be a very welcome addition. Because especially in the age of The Last of Us Part 2 from Naughty Dog, enemy AI is capable of being a lot better than this. We know what really good AI in stealth games looks like, and this ain't it. This is very like 2015 stealth, so it's serviceable, but it's by no means groundbreaking or even remarkable in the slightest, except for remarking on how lackluster and not exceptional it is. But that being said, there were a couple of times where the NPCs did things that I thought were relatively intelligent and weren't in line with just super dumb AI, marchy, come get the target girl, even if it kills me type of NPC stuff that we normally see. Such as in this case where I was spotted, but because I had extinguished his torch using an alchemical compound on my sling, and also because there were no braziers nearby, he couldn't reignite his torch to continue through the rats that were between us to get to me. So instead, he just stayed there. Now, it would have been nice if he had started like shouting as loud as he could to his buddies who were maybe 50 meters away. Hey, I found them. They're over there. I'm trapped though. Come help. It would have been great if he had done that, but instead he just kind of stood there. And then after I rounded the corner, he lost sight of me and I was far enough away that his AI just turned off. So he just turned around and then like forgot that I was there. He didn't walk around like straight into the rats. He was confined there, but it was a little underwhelming that he just happened to forget. Like, oh, clearly there's somebody who's not supposed to be here marching through here, and she just tried to kill me by extinguishing my torch. Oh, well, anyway, the weather's nice. You know, it's unfortunate because it just kind of tears you out of the moment when you are initially like, oh, that's cool. He's stopped dead in his tracks, and I did that. That's awesome. And then you realize, oh no, he's just so stupid. He doesn't know what to do. Okay, well, you know, almost cool, almost great, but a little like upon further investigation, it's not as exciting as it initially seemed. There is some increased enemy variety in this game, though it's mostly relegated to different skins on enemy archetypes that are the same as previous games. So it might be your same humanoid character with a sword and a torch that comes at you, but this time there's also one with an axe. It's technically variety, but they share the same animation, so not really. Or a couple slight variations of the big brute enemies that come at you and require different tactics to break down their armor before they're vulnerable, things like that. It's a nice addition and it does shake things up slightly, but I would guess that most players who played the original Plague Tale Innocence back in 2019 coming into this game might just interpret it as more of the same. It's not different enough to feel like it's totally changed, because frankly it's not. But even the couple of times that they introduce a new character that's relatively unique and different, they don't really put them to good use and they don't really mix and match them in levels. And probably the best example of this is a falcon archetype that they introduce like roughly halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way through the game, and they just never use it again. This guy's really interesting. Basically, he can send the falcon to swoop in, and if you are caught with your head above cover at the moment it swoops down onto you, he'll grab you and you're dead. But it's not super well thought out or fleshed out because he only can get you on the initial swoop down, not on the swoop back. So after he passes the point of cover you're headed to, on the way out, you just start walking. You could even run full sprint, totally standing up, and the falcon will fly right back over you back to his handler before coming back out, but he can't damage you on that flight back, which just seems really weird and broken. And furthermore, this enemy is not used again in the rest of the game. Like, not once. They don't use this guy. I thought for sure, oh, they're introducing a new enemy archetype. This is interesting. I could see this being really cool, like in different levels where the falcon's up there and then he can swoop down and attack you in the tall grass if it spots you because it's got really good eyesight. So maybe you have to like use top cover as well to avoid being spotted by it and then avoid all these other enemies. This could be really, really cool. And they just never use it. It doesn't come back. And I would guess this is probably yet again a result of limiting scope where they developed this archetype. They had ideas for how they would use it, but as development went on, as COVID hit, they just decided to pull it back, use it once in this very tight arena, and just move on from there. It's unfortunate because I was so excited when they introduced this new enemy archetype, but it's never used again. A couple of other random little things I feel like I should mention that I had in my notes that I just want to touch on real quick. I would have really liked to have seen more enemy and weapon recycling off of corpses as you explore levels, and not ones that are locked behind skill upgrades. You see, later you can unlock a dedicated ability to retrieve crossbow bolts from corpses that you've killed using the crossbow, but it feels really strange, for one, that this is an upgrade when it's just a matter of Amicia doing it, and they try to explain it and justify it as it being from stronger bolts or something like that, but that also doesn't really make sense because Amicia doesn't craft these crossbow bolts like the ammo for her sling. She just finds them around arenas and carries them with her. So it doesn't make sense that she upgrades and then just has stronger bolts somehow. At least like allow us to upgrade the bolt in the crafting menu and then we can retrieve it. But if we don't upgrade it using materials, then we can't retrieve it. That would at least make sense. But instead, it's just sort of like an arbitrary switch that flips at some point where, oh, now you can pick up that thing over there. But before that, you can't pick it up. Even though you see the bolt sticking out of the corpse, you can't pick it up until you unlock this other thing. It feels like something that has been taken away from the player, the ability to remove these bolts from bodies, just to make the game more difficult or to counterbalance a weapon that's already pretty broken. Because like I said, the crossbow is far and away the most OP ability and weapon that you have in the game, which is likely why they stepped in and felt the need to disallow you from just removing the bolt when you wanted it, because it was already too powerful. If you're able to just from the outset start going and collecting all these bolts, it's the only weapon anybody would be using in any combat encounter, which makes sense. And that's why they wait until almost the end of the game when they start throwing waves and waves of enemies at you to give you this ability to retrieve the bolts, because they figure, we're at the end, we'll just start sending tons of enemies. So it's not about like resourcefully getting through levels, it's just about surviving levels. And also one other thing that I want to mention, just because a viewer in our live chat mentioned this when they were playing the game, and I feel like I should address it because I have some notes on it already. There's a sequence in the game where Amicia starts losing her mind thinking that she's Iron Man and can fight waves and waves of enemies by herself, almost getting herself killed in the process. And at one point she gets pinned down by a couple of archers that are flinging arrows at her. Now here we've unlocked the crossbow, and pretty easily we could use the crossbow in this instance to quickly take out the archers and carry on and be safe and be good. We don't have to sprint through their field of fire. We can just take them out with the crossbow, boom, boom, we're done. And I initially thought, oh, well, look, the arrows get stuck in this wood barrier that's in front of me. I bet I could pull these arrows out and then load them into my crossbow and use those to shoot the archers. But you can't. And initially I was kind of frustrated by this because I felt like, oh, this was such a cool moment. It could have been so awesome to be able to just remove these and then immediately use them back against the same guys that shot them at you. But for one, they're being shot from bows, not from crossbows. And crossbow bolts are different from arrows used in a bow. They're different in length, thickness. It's all totally different. So it's important to note that it's not easily hot swappable or anything. They're totally different in terms of ammunition. You might be able to load up like a bow's arrow from a quiver into a crossbow and get it to fire okay, but I can understand why the game designers were like, I don't know, we kind of want the player to have to sprint past them, so we'll just put archers up there instead of the crossbowmen, because then we have an excuse for them not being able to pull the arrows out and use it, even though that seems really obvious. So narratively, I think they explain it away and there's justification for this, but I will say it was an initial point of frustration because I felt like it was something that seemed so organic. Oh, the arrow's right there. Let me grab it off the barrier and then shoot it at them. It makes sense why you can't. Maybe a single line of dialogue from Amicia would have solved it, but I saw enough people mention this and complain about it because it seemed like something she should be able to do that I felt like I would address it. So the combat, all told, isn't tremendous, but it wasn't tremendous in the first game, and frankly that's not why you play games like A Plague Tale, like Uncharted, like The Last of Us. It's not usually a game you're enjoying for the gameplay itself. It can have decent gameplay, but that's not why you're playing it. A lot of the reason you're playing it is for the narrative, the level design, the world ambiance, and the set pieces, of course. So let's touch on exploration. As you work through the game, you'll find that there are many different levels and set pieces throughout. Early in the game, most of the levels are extremely linear and small, but as you work your way through, roughly halfway through the game, you'll start to realize that there are some massive levels that you're just allowed to go and explore. They don't even hold your hand really at all. You just go screw around, you know, it's pretty cool. Probably the clearest example is this big open space from roughly halfway through the game where you just run around exploring, seeing how people live on this island, exploring the different windmills that are up. It's a cool touch. These levels are expansive. There's tons of cool little nitty-gritty details to find, and I think it's really well done all told. Honestly, it reminded me of that big open section at the beginning of The Lost Legacy, which of course is another Uncharted entry. The difference, of course, being that in A Plague Tale Requiem, there's a lot less guidance here. Basically, you'll run up to the base of the hill because you know that you need to head up into the mountains, and there will be a cart there with these guys saying, oh, we have to deliver flowers up the mountain for a ceremony that's going on for something in the story. So you just have to go dink around and find stuff to do. And I actually really like these moments, even though I know for some players they might find it more annoying than nice. You basically just turn around and go explore. And there's a couple of things that clearly call out for your attention, but there's also some cool hidden areas you can find as well. The windmills have little puzzles to solve within them because these were used by smugglers. In case you ever played the game, I won't spoil how the puzzles work, but they're actually pretty fun. It's a good touch. Or the big tower that you can find is also really nice and appealing and is a good place to look. Or you can just follow around these bird statues that are pointing in different directions that lead you to a place you need to go to continue along the story. But it's totally open to you and you can do whatever you want. It's pretty cool. And again, it's so different from how the first game worked. The first game was extremely narrow, extremely tight in its scope and in how levels worked. There was very little flexibility from level to level in how you got through them or explored them. So to have something like this is just like night and day. It's really weird to see from a smaller studio like this, but it works really well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, as you're exploring these levels, your primary goals are going to be looting different items. These could be crafting materials, knives for quick stealth kills and defensive knockouts, tools that you can use to make upgrades at workbenches, upgrade materials, or little things such as souvenirs or flowers to add to Hugo's collection for Amicia. These souvenirs are basically small moments that you can discover throughout your journey, and they're saved in the menus. It's sort of like collectibles, but they're collectibles that are tied into a story beat or some little anecdote or a memory or a moment that Amicia and Hugo or one of her companions shares. It's a good way of doing it, and I actually really like this. It could be something as simple as discovering some flowers on the ground or an old olive tree, and it's a nice way of sort of putting a nice highlighter on a moment so that you remember it more clearly and fondly. I really like these things. And then the flowers that Hugo collects for Amicia are usually the most well hidden things in the game. These are behind hidden paths, or it might be behind like a drawbridge in a hidden section with only one very small lock that you have to shoot with your sling, but you can only shoot it from a very specific angle if you happen to spot it. And it's a nice little touch of customization because Amicia, once she discovers the flower, will put it in her hair and then it's seen in cutscenes and all of that stuff. It's just a nice touch. I really like these things. But beyond looting, you'll also be solving a bunch of puzzles to work your way through levels. Again, very much akin to something we would see in Uncharted. Usually you work through these with companions and with their specific abilities. But I do think it's important to note that I never felt like I had to sit down and really think my way through these puzzles. 99% of the time, they were more tedious than they were difficult and challenging, just requiring you to go through the motions of doing what the game clearly wants you to do and continuing along your way that way. For example, there's like a door with two locks and then a lever in between them, and so you have two companions with you. You send one companion to pull that lever, the other to pull that lever, and then you pull the middle one. It's not difficult. You clearly know what it wants you to do. You just have to go through the steps of being like, okay, I got to get that companion to that one, so I've got to open this door, okay? Then I got to get this guy to that door, so I've got to smash that barrel and ignite that to blow up that hole in the wall so they can get in. Okay, boom, we're good. It's not difficult. It's just going through the motions. Which again, maybe I'm a simpleton, but I don't find this stuff bad necessarily. I don't think every game needs to have extremely difficult puzzles, and I think a lot of the time, those difficult puzzles could even harm the pacing of the story. So in some cases, you don't even want that. And this is something that's really important that's just seemingly never brought up in game reviews or critiques by a lot of other people I've noticed. And that is that sometimes a gameplay idea can sound really good, but it has what are known, like in economics, as externalities. It can be great by itself in a vacuum, but once implemented into the broader sort of system, it can create disruptions that you didn't foresee or that are not worth its implementation. It's a cost that outweighs the benefit. And it's something I mentioned a bunch in my initial review of the game, which was simply that I felt as though the pacing was really, really good. You just clipped along at a steady pace. I never felt like I got stuck on a big boss fight or a stealth sequence or a really difficult puzzle or anything like that. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think getting stuck on a puzzle because it's so hard is a good thing. I don't think a super difficult boss in the middle of the story is a good thing with these types of games. Because when you are playing a narrative title, you need to be in tune with the character's emotions, what's going on in the story, the mood, all of that. Your emotions have to be following a very precise thread through the story in order for these story beats to hit properly. And if you hit a roadblock or just a brick wall with a really difficult boss or puzzle, that's gonna wear off pretty soon. You'll pretty quickly forget what's going on in the story with the characters, their motivations, their concerns, their stresses, anxieties, whatever, and you'll just be annoyed with this damn puzzle that you can't figure out. And that's not fun, and it doesn't serve the story, in which case it's better to just shed that difficult puzzle out and put something more simple in its place that you know most players are going to be able to get through in a reasonable amount of time and then carry on through the story. Again, it's not to say that gameplay that's difficult is never okay. Of course, I love Elden Ring and it's one of my front runners for Game of the Year, but you'll notice that Elden Ring is not trying to give you a super tight and concise, well-structured narrative at the same time. There are story things, there's world elements, but there's a reason that story in Elden Ring and every other FromSoft title is told in a much more hands-off way, allowing you to pace it yourself instead of trying to pace it on their end, forcing you through it. Because if they try to do that, whenever you get against a hard boss or a difficult encounter, that pacing goes out the window. But with that said, one more thing about these puzzles. You solve these with the help of your companions, as I mentioned earlier, and sometimes the companions even need to throw you certain items in order for you to progress through that particular puzzle. An example here early in the game is when Lucas throws me some stuff to create a tar jar that I can use to light my way through this very narrow rat-infested pathway. Now I wanted to experiment and see what the game would allow me to do, so I tried to basically force my way through this puzzle by not following his instructions and trying to solve it my own way. Didn't work out super great. And as a result, I ended up using all of the items that he had thrown to me, and I just didn't have any else to craft with. So I was, what I thought, soft locked. And so I force reloaded, tried the puzzle again, and I was fine. Lost no time at all because I reloaded right at the checkpoint where he throws me the items. Wasn't a big deal. However, after I tested this another time, I realized that you can actually just ask your companion by holding down left bumper for more items. If you've used them all, he'll just throw you more and you can try again. It's a good touch. I didn't realize this initially when I reloaded, but there is a way in the game to avoid those types of speed bumps of just having to like force reload and potentially tear you out of the immersion you were feeling. They actually accounted for that in a lot of these puzzles, which I think is a good touch. I will insist, I think Lucas should have called out to me a little faster. Like once I used the item and didn't have any more crafting materials in my inventory, the game should have been able to check that. And then if I met that criteria, have Lucas trigger a line of dialogue. Amicia, what are you doing? You wasted all the items. Here's some more. And that's all it would take. Unfortunately, that line of dialogue didn't trigger for me, but not a huge deal because again, even with a forced reload, I lost maybe 10 seconds of progress. Like it's not a big deal. And if we're going to get that nitpicky with stuff like this, I mean, what are we doing? Like people often say like, Luke, I think you're just nitpicking these games. I'm like, well, for one, it's a critique. That's kind of the point. But also like, if the worst thing I have to say about a game is like, hey, in this one puzzle, I screwed it up and then I had to waste 10 seconds of time to reload. Like, if that's the worst thing I have to say about a game, that's pretty high praise in and of itself. You know, so just because I'm pointing out little nitty gritty things that I notice doesn't mean that the game on the whole has to suck or has, a ton of issues. I can point these things out and the game still be good. You know, it's possible to have a nuanced take, believe it or not. But one of the other things I really like about these puzzles, about the looting and exploration of these big levels and everything, is that it allows you to have conversations with your companions that wouldn't make sense in dedicated cutscenes, or that wouldn't feel natural in dedicated cutscenes. And it works really well. It's actually something that Naughty Dog sort of pioneered back in the day with Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 2, and that became a mainstay of their titles, where pretty much every level you go through, with few exceptions in Uncharted at least, will pair the character, Nathan Drake, up with a companion. It could be Elena, could be Sully, could be Sam, doesn't matter. And they are able to exchange lines of dialogue and stories and comment on what they're seeing, where you are in the story. It works tremendously well, and it keeps things moving. It reminds you of where you are in the story, and it's a great way of handling sort of passive narrative communication and exposition, even in sequences of gameplay. And Plague Tale implements it in A Plague Tale Innocence, and then even better in A Plague Tale Requiem. These big open levels allow you to have conversations with Lucas, with Hugo, with Arnaud, with Sophia. It works tremendously well because it feels much more natural as you're just running through an open field on your way to the next destination, and Sophia starts telling you stories of her time out on the sea. It works really, really well. But okay, so far we have two staples and pillars of gameplay. We have combat, and then we have exploration with looting and all of this stuff. What's the third? It's crafting. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to be collecting different items as you explore these levels, and this allows you to craft different alchemical compounds to affix to your crossbow bolts or to your rocks that you fling at people with your sling, etc., etc. You can even throw stuff together into pots to have a more explosive effect. You also use the aforementioned upgrade materials and tools to upgrade different things at the workbench. This could be improvements to your sling, crafting material holding capacity, jar carrying capacity, and even a recycling tool, which I really like in concept. The reason I say in concept is because it's not actually implemented super well. Basically, how it's communicated in the menus to the player when they choose to upgrade this is that with this tool, you can basically recycle and disassemble items you find in the world if your inventory of that item is currently maxed out. So you can still benefit while you explore from finding different things. If you have full ammo capacity, for example, you're still justified in exploring because you can still get something out of that exploration. The problem is you only get to gather like one or two things at a time. There's like very, very little here. And so it feels like kind of a wasted upgrade, if I'm being honest. And it's not the only wasted upgrade either. There's also an upgrade that you can unlock which allows you to craft anywhere in the map without a workbench whenever you want, simply through selecting the select button on your controller and going through the menus that way. The problem is workbenches are so numerous, this doesn't really feel useful, and also you still need crafting materials. And because the recycling upgrade is basically useless, you're gonna be struggling to find a lot of these crafting materials to make these upgrades anyways. So you're not going to be upgrading as frequently as this thing would suggest you will be. You're still going to be doing it roughly every time that you hit a dedicated workbench, or even less than that. So it's just a waste of time. Similarly, they have an ability where you can basically get an unbreakable tool and upgrade your stuff without the requirement of having a dedicated tool that you discover as you explore levels. Again, the problem with that is just that tools are pretty ubiquitous. You find them all over the place. And by the end of the game, I think I had 6 in my inventory that I hadn't used yet. Like, it's not that big of a deal to just go find tools. So it sounds really useful, but it ends up just being a bit of a waste of time. Maybe the way they balance it is by having it so once you get the unbreakable tool, you can then use the recycling ability to break down the tools into like a lot of crafting components, maybe like 50 crafting components, when most upgrades are like 60 to 90 crafting components after the first level. That could work really well, but unfortunately, every time you just break something down with the recycling ability, you get like 1 or 2 crafting materials, and that's it. So I think if they do anything in patches to try and make this game better, they should revisit these upgrades, because right now they feel totally useless. But all told, this triad of gameplay is not a bad thing at all. I think it works relatively well. My only frustration is that most of the upgrades feel pretty minimal, and also at the same time like they should have been included from the start, such as the ability to pull crossbow bolts out of bodies that you've killed. And if I had to put a single word on it, I would say it feels more broadly contrived. It feels like they put this in here because they needed a gameplay system, not because it actually made the most sense. But that's been a criticism of most narrative games for like a decade or a decade and a half. I mean, even the original Last of Us game got a ton of flack because everybody was saying the gameplay and the upgrade system wasn't robust enough to really justify spending a lot of time doing it. It just felt like it was more busy work than an actual system that was really, really useful. And I think it's just an artifact of a game that prioritizes the narrative first and foremost. You feel like you need to put gameplay systems in there, and inevitably they end up having a little less attention paid to them than they probably should. But the good thing is that there's a lot of potential for whatever the next game is to take the foundations laid here and upgrade it even further. But what makes this game really stand out? I mean, I said I think the game is really remarkable and it's one of my favorite games of the year. So what is it that makes it so phenomenal? Well, for me, it's a few things. For one, it's how they exceeded my expectations. Secondly, it's that the story is actually quite moving, especially if you found the first game compelling. And then thirdly, they follow in the vein of Uncharted and sort of pick up the torch from them and go with some crazy huge set pieces, these amazing rat sequences with just waves of rats, hundreds of thousands of them on screen at any given time. And they managed to pull off some crazy cinematic sequences that I frankly did not see coming. And to be clear, this is something that some people will love, some people will hate it. I totally understand that not everybody likes cinematic games or games that do sort of Hollywood-esque sequences in the middle of their stories and gameplay sequences. I get that. I understand that. I happen to be somebody who really likes this stuff. I like playing it and just being like, oh my God. I like that feeling of holy shit. And they do a really, really good job of it here. And like I said, they exceeded my expectations because I went into this game expecting it to be like A Plague Tale: Innocence, basically just another AA fun little romp in the indie scene. Hey, and it does a way better job of these big set pieces and moments than a lot of AAA games have done recently. Some examples of these crazy set pieces would be such as this one. You basically went to this city, you loved it, you walked around it with Hugo, it was bright, vivid, lively, and within no time, Hugo's sickness causes a ton of rats to appear and they systematically destroy the entire city. And you get to run through the city as they do it. This was something we saw in some trailers and some stuff that they revealed ahead of time. I knew that what they were doing was pretty impressive this time around, but to actually get to play it in congruity with the rest of the story, it works really, really well. And I was just baffled and blown away at some of these sequences. It just didn't even seem possible what they were able to do on screen with these rats. It's really, really impressive. And again, this is not a huge studio, which makes it all the more impressive to me. Or like this sequence at the bottom of a gigantic pit where the original carrier of the macula was basically chained up and held before he died of a broken heart and summoned all the rats and the plague and everything like that. Really depressing, really sad. It breaks my heart, but the swarm of rats that they trigger here and chase you out of the pit is pretty impressive in and of itself, and it was one of my favorite set pieces as well. And I mean, you've got to praise the final sequences of rats with the waves of rats that come out after Hugo has basically gone nuclear. I mean, this is just freaking cool. I have it pulled up on my screen right now. There's just so many rats being rendered at any given time. And the sound design is tremendous. The far off set pieces are great. It's just really well done. And there's also this moment with the gigantic rat men that chase you. It's sort of the Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice moment in the game. It immediately made me think of that ending of that game. Spoiler real quick for Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice real quick, because I'm just going to talk about the very ending of that game for just a brief moment. So skip ahead like a minute if you don't want to hear it. But basically at the end of Hellblade, there's this moment where Senua is basically fighting these waves and waves of enemies, and eventually she realizes the only way to overcome this mental stress and anguish that she has been dealing with is to let go and to stop resisting and to give in and basically allow herself to be defeated. So you as the player will be fighting through waves and waves and waves of enemies, and eventually you have to decide, I'm going to let myself die, I'm going to let go and stop resisting and embrace it. And there's a very similar moment at the end of Plague Tale Requiem where you have to basically give in. So instead of trying to fight off these big rat men, you have to use the extinguish ability on your sling and extinguish the brazier that's in front of you and just allow the rats to overtake you, to stop resisting it, stop fighting it, and accept the inevitable, which is the overarching story and theme at the heart of this game in and of itself, because Amicia throughout the whole story is trying to find a way to save Hugo, and as she does that, it just leads to more and more death being introduced into the world everywhere they go. And Hugo eventually realizes that this isn't going to end happily. They've got to let go. They've got to just give in and accept the inevitable. And so the player is tasked with doing that as well. And it's a pretty cool moment once you realize what you have to do. I really, really like this. And the way they tie it in with the birds that are pointing you in a specific direction initially when you go into this like dream realm, Amicia is running, trying to figure out where they're pointing to and figure out where she needs to go to find Hugo. And eventually Hugo's like, no, you've got to let go. Go in the opposite direction. Don't follow those clues. Don't chase them. You've got to buck the trend and break this repetitious cycle that we've been caught in. You got to do things differently. And then probably the most like, oh crap moment of the entire game for me was this sequence where you're riding in the back of a carriage with basically this flamethrower thing. And just an ocean of rats comes and chases you as they tear down the castle walls. It's actually pretty insane. And in the context of the story, again, everything that's been building up, it is this moment of just like, oh my God, what the hell are we doing? And it's so great. It really comes together nicely. And I know maybe watching just like some video of it doesn't do it justice, but playing through it, especially with some good audio blasting, there's nothing quite like it. They really did a great job with this. And like I said, I just love these set pieces. I love having crazy high production value sequences that just make you go, wow, I love this. And they did a phenomenal job. I can't praise it enough. It's not easy getting these sequences working so fluidly without major like performance issues or hitches or anything. And I've heard some whispers of issues on the console versions of the game. I can't speak to that. I played it on PC, and what I do know is on PC it worked tremendously well, and I have very few complaints. Now, speaking of the narrative, I want to go through this a little quicker. Maybe I'll do like a commentary on the story of Plague Tale. If you guys would be interested in it. If you are, let me know in the comments section below. Sometimes with games, I'll do a commentary from beginning to end like I did with Cyberpunk or The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. But with this game, I think I would have to start at the first game and carry all the way through. So maybe I'll do that. If you're interested, let me know. But for now, I'll keep things kind of broad strokes. You see, the game is all about these different conflicts at play, which is great because stories are only interesting if there is conflict. We have Hugo's sickness, Amicia's guilt, Amicia's depression and desperation surrounding finding a cure for her little brother. She just wants to save him and for him to be okay, happy, and healthy like he is at the beginning of the game. And she's willing to do literally anything it takes to achieve that goal, which ends up driving her straight into the dirt, and it drives Hugo straight into the dirt. Unfortunately, literally. And from just a few hours into the game, there's this omnipresent dread that will come over the player where you know how it has to end. You know there's probably no saving Hugo. This doesn't look like there's a solution. The last kid that was the host of the macula, of this plague and this evil that's causing all this, he died and it didn't end too well for him. It's probably not going to be that different for Hugo. So like, you know that's coming. It's like Titanic. You know the ship is going down, but you keep hoping somehow there's going to be a happy ending, and there can't be a traditionally happy ending. The happiest ending is for Hugo and Amicia to accept the inevitable and learn to live with it and grow from it and try to prevent this from happening in the future. And that's inevitably what happens. At the very end of the game, once you've accepted the inevitable, Amicia has to go in and kill Hugo with her sling in one of the most difficult to pull trigger pulls on my controller I've ever had to do. And then at the end of the game, Amicia goes off, visits Hugo's grave, says some nice words as birds sit around him, which was very, very sweet. I'm not going to tear up. I'm going to keep it together. And then she decides that she's going to go off and find where the next host of the macula is going to be and the next protector so that she can give them guidance on how to prevent this from happening again. And it's sort of a coming full circle. She's going to come back. She's going to guide the next group and help them avoid making the same mistakes that she and Hugo made. It's as happy an ending as it could have possibly had. And I think one of the reasons the story hits so hard and so well for me is because not only are the characters voice acted tremendously well, I think the writing is done really, really well, but Amicia also is just a very vulnerable character, and she's not afraid of communicating and showing how frustrated and desperate and sad and overwhelmed she is all at the same time. And to this certain extent, there isn't like a lot of levity here. I think it's one of the potential issues with Plague Tale Requiem's pacing is that towards the end, there are less and less moments of calm and of tranquility and appreciation where you can just kind of chill out for a minute. There's less and less of that and more dread and angst and stress and hoping that this doesn't have to happen this way, which makes you feel very much like Amicia. So in that extent, I can appreciate it. But I think it's important to note that by the end of the game, you're going to be pretty emotionally drained. And part of it is because Amicia is also emotionally drained. She's starting to freak out. And as the story progresses and she sees everywhere she goes with Hugo and everywhere Hugo ends up, more people die, thousands upon thousands of people die. Everything's being destroyed. Like, it doesn't work this way. It can't work this way. It's not sustainable. Eventually, this has to come to an end. And she knows how it has to come to an end, but she doesn't really want to admit it to herself. And people talk all the time about like character arcs and how arcs are so important. But the basic premise is that you want to tell a story with characters that start one way and end up another way, or start in one place in their lives or mentally or physically, whatever, and they end up somewhere else. Something's changed. They've either progressed or they've degraded. Something has to be altered. In Breaking Bad, you start with Mr. Rogers and you end up as Scarface. Or in the case of The Last of Us Part 2, you start out just angry and bitter, and then Ellie at the end of the game sort of accepts her lot in life and how everything ended up and is able to move on from this devastating loss. And in the case of A Plague Tale, both Innocence and Requiem, we get to see this progression of Amicia and Hugo's relationship where it starts out great in the first game, and then their father dies, and then all of this stuff starts to kind of follow suit as their family life falls apart. Things get worse and worse and worse. And then at the end of the first game, they think maybe they figured out, they get with their mother, they're living in a nice quiet place, it's beautiful. Hugo's sickness has basically been dormant for 6 months, and then it starts to act up again. And then over the course of Requiem, everything starts falling apart again and again. And you reach rock bottom right towards the end of the story. And Amicia realizes this is inevitable. We just need to end this. And Hugo agrees that we need to end this. And then the story is able to resolve itself nicely. And at the end of the story, at the end of the game, in the epilogue, we get the final moment of tranquility where Amicia has accepted everything. And you see this broad journey that they've gone on. Amicia is a totally different human being, not just physically, her appearance has changed a lot, she's grown up, but also emotionally, spiritually, whatever that means, she's very much changed. But it's not just broad strokes improved. There's a lot of little minutia that's done really, really well here. For one, they lightened up Amicia's accent a good amount from the first game. That's something maybe not a lot of people will notice, but when I watched some clips I recorded from the first game, listening to Amicia speak and then listening to her speak in this game, it's much more toned down. And that's probably because a lot of Americans were like, I can't understand what she's saying. She needs to speak English in this English dub. And I get that. I understand that. They, dumb it down for English audiences if you need to. I get that. It's not that big of a deal. She still clearly has an accent, but it's not as aggressive. But there's also these little story beats that are just executed tremendously well, such as this example where Hugo's mother has just been killed in front of him. He kind of has a mental break and disconnects, and the macula takes over more and more of him. And it's supposed to be representative of him sort of disconnecting. The evil is taking over and her little brother is being lost in the mixture. And all throughout the game and all throughout the first game, Hugo holds Amicia's hand as you explore levels. It's one of the staples of Plague Tale. And in this moment, he doesn't hold her hand. He marches in front of her without holding her hand, distant and disconnected. It's one of the most subtle and yet heartbreaking things I've seen in a video game in quite a while. When this happened, I was like, oh my God. It's so well executed. It's so subtle, but it hits you like a train. And it's moments like this that really tie the game together, because a lesser studio, worse writers would have just blasted past this type of thing. But every little detail is just so well tied together, you've got to praise it. But all told, I mean, I think Plague Tale Requiem does a lot really, really well. Sure, it's not like the most amazing gameplay systems. It doesn't do that much that's crazy different from the original game. But what they do accomplish and what they set out to accomplish is remarkable, and they do a great job of it. And in its capacity as a narrative title, I think it's one of the best in recent years, especially when you consider it against the original game and you follow that story from beginning to this end. Like I said, they sort of hint at a possible sequel, or maybe like, I guess you might classify this as a cliffhanger, where you see what looks like a baby's arm in sort of a strange womb with the macula. To me, it signifies that the next host of the macula that Amicia is going off to find is currently, in utero, is about to be born. So this is not over, and there's another wave of this thing set up. So I guess they set it up for a sequel, but whatever the sequel is, it will be Amicia in sort of a guidance role and not as the direct guardian of the host of the macula. So it would be really, really interesting. I'm not sure if they'll actually do it, or if they're going to try a different IP, something other, original that they could do. I'm not sure, but whatever it is, I'm intrigued. But like I said at the beginning of this video, whenever we evaluate games like this, it's important that we do so by evaluating it against what it actually is, not what we wish it were or what we hoped it would be. It's important that we just look at it for what it is and what they were trying to do. And in that context, this game is a tremendous success. And like I've said before, Game Pass has totally altered how we recommend games as game critics now. It used to be that something like this would be a little tougher to recommend for everybody, just because it would be maybe $60, $70 to put up for a AAA game or a full-fledged release. So it would be kind of hard to recommend for everybody unless they already find this type of game really compelling. But the fact that this is on Game Pass day one makes it an easy recommend for everybody. The first game's only 8 hours. It's also, I believe, on Game Pass. You absolutely should play it, and then you should go right into A Plague Tale Requiem and enjoy the crap out of this one. They're both tremendous games, and if you play them back to back, I think you're going to be in for an emotional roller coaster that will knock your socks off. All told, I give A Plague Tale Requiem 2 thumbs up, and I'm excited to see what Asobo Studio does next, because as far as I'm concerned, they have now cemented themselves alongside some of the best narrative designers and developers in the world. Whether you look at Santa Monica Studio, Naughty Dog, they're up there, and I think they are real players now. And as these games get more and more success, I think they're only going to get bigger and bigger budgets and more freedom to do whatever they want. And that is a very good thing, because the more competition is in the industry, the better games we as gamers are going to get. But I'm going to leave it there. I've got a stream to jump on in 13 minutes, so I'm going to call it there. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you guys very, very much. If you want to come over, hang out with us on stream, like I said, Luke Stevens live, links in the link tree below. You can join me live when we're doing stuff like this. I just filmed this critique, and now we're going to go play some PT and look at whatever the Silent Hill reveal is going to be that they're doing. So we're going to go check that out, but thank you for watching. I love you guys very, very much. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Hugs and kisses. See you next time. Bye-bye.